Majewski from University, who is involved in a 1-year research grant focused specifically on Plotinus and Owen Barfield under my supervision, and Szymon will tell us about his research. The project began a couple of months ago and it will end in February, so it's a report on working in progress.
Yes, very much. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Strużyński for this opportunity and for inviting me here. And I should probably start with a disclaimer that some of the topics I will be mentioning were already covered in several in differing levels of depth. So hopefully I won't just be repeating others, but maybe connecting some of the topics which have been mentioned so far and maybe summarize some of them. So we've already heard today about several parallels between the ideas and worldviews of Owen Barfield and Plotinus. However, even though those similarities can be quite striking when reading those two authors back to back, Plotinus himself is rarely in the foreground of Barfield's works, especially compared to other pre-modern thinkers like Plato or Thomas Aquinas, to whom numerous paragraphs were devoted. Because of that, the relationship between the theories of Barfield and Plotinus isn't as clear-cut and still hasn't been thoroughly explored, which leaves room for more research such as mine. My project, which has a form of a 12-month student research internship, is a part of the Excellence Initiative Research University program, which aims to introduce senior year students into the field of international research. My current work is a comparative effort aimed at finding direct and indirect references in the works of Owen Barfield to Plotinus and to the broader Neoplatonic tradition, determining the role of Plotinus's writings in the development of Barfield's ideas, particularly about language, metaphor, meaning, etc., and achieving better understanding of both Barfield's and Plotinus's theories through comparative analysis. Such a broad project would, of course, require a much deeper study than what can be achieved in the scope of 12 months. So this is only an initial stage with the goal of familiarization with the subject matter, which should serve as a basis for further research. My primary sources so far have been two books by Owen Barfield, which you probably know very well, namely Poetic Fiction, a Study in Meaning, 4th edition from 2010, and Saving the Appearances, a Study in Idolatry, 2nd edition from 1988, as well as Plotinus's Enneads, the original text according to Henry Schweitzer edition from 1982, with English translation from 1989 by A.H. Armstrong. Comparing the works of those two authors and trying to determine the level of influence between them presents a set of challenges, most of which stem from the aforementioned scarcity of explicit allusions to Plotinus in Barfield's books. In Saving the Appearances, Neoplatonism is referred to mainly in passing, with only 2 mentions and a singular quoting of Plotinus. Quote, "If anyone disparages the art on the ground that they imitate nature, we must remind him that natural objects are themselves only imitations, and that the arts do not simply imitate what they see, but reascend to those principles from which nature herself is derived." We'll return to this quote later, but I'll add that in poetic diction, the situation is even more dire, with no mention of Plotinus or even Neoplatonism whatsoever. However, those familiar with it, like yourselves most likely, might agree with me that it nevertheless possesses a certain feel or air reminiscent of Plotinus, if not informed, then at least in the worldview it presents. One of the goals of my project is to try and pinpoint this Plotinian quality and determine where it stems from, hopefully shedding some new light on the connections between Barfield and Plotinus's philosophies. Those few direct references we have show that Barfield was familiar with Plotinus's writings to some extent, but if he were influenced by them to a large degree, i.e. he had the Enneads in mind when developing his theories, one would expect to find more mentions of Plotinus in his books, considering Barfield doesn't shy away from openly admitting to his other sources of inspiration, modern, medieval, and ancient alike. This shortage of direct references will seem even more baffling once we consider the amount of similarities between the two writers, some of which I plan to go through later. If those similarities don't originate from the writings of Plotinus directly, they can be a product of either the broader Neoplatonic tradition through such thinkers as Saint Augustine or Thomas Aquinas, both referenced by Barfield on numerous occasions, or of an independent convergence of Barfield's and Plotinus's conclusions, which might stem from the influences they both shared, mainly Plato, whom Barfield also mentions on a regular basis. Regardless, Barfield certainly saw himself as a part of a long-standing tradition of Western philosophy, part of which was, of course, Neoplatonism. To illustrate which part of that tradition Barfield was most interested in, it might be best to use a quote from his 1944 book, Romanticism Comes of Age. Actually, it was the point at which philosophy borders on psychology which interested me most, and I pursued my studies to some extent into the latter realm, limiting them, however, to psychology proper, that is, to the study of the psyche, starting from psychic data, end quote. When comparing Barfield's work to Plotinus, I think it would be appropriate to first look at what Barfield himself tells us about understanding this tradition. In several instances, Barfield provides us with advice concerning the reading of ancient or pre-modern in general texts. In both aforementioned books, he warns excessively about the dangers of projecting our modern worldview and experience of reality into the experience and thought of people who were at the earlier stages of the evolution of consciousness, a tendency which he dubbed logomorphism and diagnosed as being prevalent in the modern scientific community. Quote, if we are content to translate and to think, mind for nous and reason or word for logos, we are in continual danger of surreptitiously substituting our own phenomena for those which they were in fact dealing with. End quote. Going so far as to call it a historical delusion, Barfield views this tendency as a major hindrance to our understanding, to our efforts of trying to understand the lives and works of people from the past, which has led to the creation of several flawed concepts, like the theory of the roots of speech or the metaphorical period, which used to be widely accepted but have been largely discredited by now. He points out to the untranslatableness of certain words, nous and logos being prime examples of that, and emphasizes the need to detach oneself from the established meanings and thought forms of one's own civilization in order to grasp their significance through what he called the power of unthinking. Two major ways in which, according to Barfield, our modern worldview and experience differ from those of the ancients are deeply connected to key concepts which are of equal relevance to understanding the theories of both him and Plotinus, those being unity and participation. Barfield on numerous occasions shows that our modern way of thinking and feeling detaches us from the universe around us, and that it didn't used to be the case. Even if we're conceptually aware that in some sense or on some level we're all a part of the world, we rarely feel this way anymore. The idea of man as a microcosm deeply connected to the macrocosm surrounding him, and in fact him being an image of the whole world, which is in turn a reflection of man, has long since vanished from our personal experience. This all-encompassing unity, which conjoins all levels of existence, is certainly something we see expressed in the Enneads, if not the philosophy of antiquity as a whole. Barfield notes that this experience of unity extended to language. Not only the phenomena surrounding ancient man, but also his words and their meanings were supposedly permeated by it. While disputing the theory of metaphorical period in poetic diction, Barfield hypothesizes that what we now call poetic or metaphorical values were latent in words from the beginning, just as their literal meanings were. Only in time, as civilization progressed and language developed, did those original single meanings split into increasingly incompatible particulars, such like abstract and concrete, metaphorical and literal, objective and subjective. A well-known example of a yet undivided meaning, which, as you might remember, was brought up by Barfield, is the word pneuma, which in John 3:5-8 signifies at the same time wind, breath, and spirit. In one of the appendices to poetic diction, Barfield cautions us that when a writer uses a particular term in seemingly two different senses, apparently confusing two ideas, which to our judgment might appear incompatible or even contradictory, we should first check whether those ideas were distinct in such a clear-cut way in the writer's time. I believe that following this sentiment might be helpful in trying to analyze instances when Plotinus occasionally uses the same words in clearly separate, or at least separate from our modern point of view meanings, or when he appears to contradict himself, unless, of course, we're ready to just dismiss those as inconsistencies or mistakes. Such instances, although often quite frustrating for a modern reader who would prefer that philosophical writings were constructed in accordance with formal logic, are unavoidable when we base our metaphysics on words and language, which, as Barfield points out, by their very nature, constantly change meaning. One of the ways in which certain terms carry quite different significance for us than they did for the ancients is connected to the element of participation, another key concept for both Plotinus and Barfield. The latter argues that ancient man's experience of the world was based on participation, which resulted in him being much more closely connected to the world than we are, and experiencing it as filled with soul and meaning. Barfield sees the proof of that in all aspects of Greek mythology, with its plethora of divine beings permeating all elements of life and nature, but also in Greek language and philosophy. Quote, the very meanings of the incidental words with the help of which they did the speculating implied participation of some sort. So Barfield claims that terms like nous or logos had a different meaning than what we now tend to ascribe to them, precisely because of that implied degree of participation. It's this experience of participation which he deems necessary for understanding the thinking of actually any philosopher who preceded the scientific revolution, at which point this experience has all but vanished from our consciousness. And the way for us to acquire it is through imagination, which isn't a product of theorizing, but of a deeply personal experience more akin to feeling than thinking. Meanwhile, the modern overdependence on the rational principle, to logizein, is actually what caused the separation of our minds from the real world, life, and truth in the first place. As Barfield puts it, it's the discursive intellectual activity that kills the meaning in words, meaning with capital M here, a remedy to which is the experience of truth, of identification of the self with the meaning of life, which is both poetry and knowledge. This leads us to another topic, namely epistemology. What do Barfield and Plotinus consider to be true knowledge? Both of them follow Plato's definition of knowledge proper as something entirely extrasensory, an immediate cognition of reality, which stems from the contemplation of divine ideas, particularly the highest idea of supreme good. Contemplation, or to put it another way, participation, because in Saving the Appearances, Barfield describes knowledge as a union with what is contemplated. He associates this outlook primarily with medieval thought, represented by thinkers such as Thomas Aquinas or Eurygenea. To quote, knowledge was the process of actualization of the soul's potentiality to become what it contemplated, and thus a stage on its journey back to God. God's own knowledge was alike the cause of all things and identical with his substance, and man participated in the being of God. Indeed, it was only by virtue of that participation that he could claim to have any being. We find similar sentiments already expressed in the Enneads. Different souls look at different things and are and become what they look at. Similarly, the way in which Barfield presents medieval worldview in general applies just as well to the system formulated in the Enneads. Quote, a formal or hierarchical participation per similitudinem was the foundation of the whole structure of the universe. For all creatures were in a greater or lesser degree images or representations or names of God, and their likeness or unlikeness did not merely measure, but was the nearer or more distant emanation of his being and goodness in them. It was a spiritual structure, and much of it lay beyond the world of appearance altogether. The distinctly Christian lens through which Barfield looks at Platonic tradition is another matter which one has to keep in mind when trying to analyze his relationship to it. However, since there is clear correspondence between the pagan and Christian streams of Western philosophy, at least in regards to the topics which were of most concern to Barfield, I won't devote much more time to this matter. I would like, however, to return to a theme I've already alluded to, namely Barfield's emphasis on feeling expressed in the preface to Poetic Diction, and to the experience of participation, which he deems so crucial for understanding past philosophers. This experience is of a mystical or religious kind when found on the pages of the Enneads or the Summa Theologica, But Barfield states that our modern mind most often catches a glimpse of it through the feeling of aesthetic imagination brought about by poetry. It leads to the expansion of consciousness, allowing it to grasp the single undivided meanings contained in words, thus experiencing some of the original unity, which was also the goal of Plotinian contemplation. And poetry leads us back to that singular quote of Plotinus employed in Saving the Appearances. By its usage, Barfield shows the need to distance himself from Plato's mimesis theory, by which art is seen nothing more than an imitation of the physical world, and thus merely an image of an image. Instead, he subscribes more to the opinion of Plotinus, believing that imagination and creative power can give us glimpses of the principles from which nature herself is derived. This is by far the clearest example of correspondence between the two thinkers, but I hope that through my rundown of some of the other topics which connect them, I've managed to at least partially show the potential for further comparative analysis, even if the list was neither comprehensive nor its elements presented in much depth. Continuing my project, I plan to look further, particularly into Plotinus's ideas about art and language, and how they can be viewed through the lens of Barfield's theories. And I'm hoping to present my findings next year. Thank you.